Lieutenant Ethan Cross awoke to the hum of cold, unfamiliar machinery. His head throbbed as he slowly lifted it from a hard surface beneath him. The first thing he noticed was the strange green glow of the room around him. The walls were made of some kind of metallic substance that shimmered in the dim light. His hands were shackled to the wall, and his feet were bound to the cold floor. He was no longer aboard his ship, no longer surrounded by his crew. The Zarethians, a race of giant reptilian conquerors, had captured him and his team during the battle for the outer sector. The mission had gone wrong from the start. His ship, the Vanguard, was overwhelmed by their massive fleet, and he barely managed to escape in an escape pod. But now, here he was, imprisoned, alone, in the heart of enemy territory. His thoughts raced. His mind was sharp as always, and he refused to let fear creep into his heart. Ethan was a soldier, a warrior trained for every worst-case scenario. He had been in tough spots before, but never anything like this. He could only assume they were on a Zarethian flagship, somewhere in deep space. He had no way of knowing how long he'd been here or what they intended to do with him. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. Ethan tensed, his sharp eyes scanning the room for any escape possibilities. There was no way to hide, no way to break free from his restraints, not without a tool, and he had nothing. The door to the room hissed open, and 2 Zarethian guards entered. Their scales glistened under the pale lights, their eyes narrowed as they observed him with disgust. Their language was harsh, guttural. He couldn't understand a word, but it was clear they were talking about him, pointing and laughing, their long tongues flicking out. The guards were huge, towering over him with their jagged teeth exposed in a grin. But Ethan didn't flinch. He refused to show weakness. As the Zarethians circled around him, he stared them down, his face a mask of defiance. They could torture him, they could lock him up, but they could never break him. He was human. He had survived worse. The door slammed open once again, and this time the presence that entered was unlike any he had felt before. A sense of authority, of power, filled the room. The Zarethian guards stiffened and bowed their heads. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A figure stepped forward into the dim light, a woman or something like it. She was taller than any Zarethian Ethan had ever seen. Her eyes gleamed gold, her green scales shimmering in the darkness. Her body was covered in intricate armor, gold and silver lining her form. But the most striking thing was her presence. She wasn't like the others. She was the queen. Queen Seraphis, the ruler of the Zarethians, stood before him, her gaze fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and something deeper, something Ethan couldn't quite place. Without a word, she dropped to one knee in front of him. Her action was so unexpected, so strange, that Ethan blinked in disbelief. Why would the queen, someone who ruled over thousands, kneel before him, a prisoner? "Forgive me," she said, her voice low but powerful. The entire room fell silent. "We have wronged your kind." Ethan's breath caught. This was no ordinary encounter. This was something much bigger. Ethan stared at Queen Seraphis, struggling to make sense of what was happening. She was kneeling before him. A queen, the ruler of the Zarethians, was kneeling to a human prisoner. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Her golden eyes were locked onto his, and her voice, though calm, held an edge of something deeper. "We have wronged your kind," she repeated, her words slow and deliberate. "I beg for your forgiveness." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. The Zarethians were known across the galaxy for their cruelty. They were conquerors, destroyers of entire civilizations, feared and hated by many. And yet here she was, the leader of them all, on her knees in front of him, a mere human. His mind raced. What did she mean? Why was she asking for forgiveness? The Zarethians had captured him, tortured his crew, and destroyed his ship. He had no reason to trust them, none at all. Yet there was something in Seraphis's eyes, something he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't fear or hatred. It was something else. almost like regret. The room was still, the Zarethian guards and advisors standing by, watching in disbelief. Ethan could hear the muffled sound of his own breathing, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The Queen's actions were not just strange. They were completely out of place. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan finally asked, his voice steady, though his mind was still racing. "Why are you kneeling to me?" Seraphis did not immediately answer. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. Slowly, she stood up, towering over him. She raised her hand, signaling for the guards and advisors to leave the room. They obeyed without question, stepping out of the chamber, leaving only Ethan and the Queen alone. Once the door closed behind them, Seraphis spoke again, her voice more measured. "It is because of the past. Something your kind did long before I was born." Ethan listened closely, his mind shifting from confusion to curiosity. He had never heard of any connection between humanity and the Zarethians before. What could she be talking about? Seraphis's eyes darkened as she continued, her voice quieter now. "Many cycles ago, long before the Zarethian Empire grew to what it is now, we faced a threat like no other. The Vothur. An enemy so powerful, so deadly, that our ancestors had no hope of survival. And then, humans came." Ethan's eyebrows furrowed. "Humans? But we've never had contact with your people before." "Not until that war," Seraphis said. "The Vothur were about to wipe us out. And in our darkest hour, humanity came, unasked and unknown. You fought them, helped us survive. And after the war, you vanished. No one knew why. But your actions were enough. You saved us." Ethan was stunned. He had heard stories of humanity's past, stories of legendary heroes and forgotten wars, but this was something he had never imagined. The Zarethians, the conquerors of the galaxy, had once been saved by humans. "You saved us," Seraphis repeated, her voice heavy with meaning. "And in return, we betrayed you." The weight of her words settled in Ethan's chest. The Zarethians had turned their back on humanity after they had been saved. They had gone on to destroy and conquer. And now, centuries later, they were asking for forgiveness. Seraphis's eyes softened. "I kneel because we owe you more than just our lives. We owe you our future." Ethan was silent, his mind racing. What kind of future could this be? And why was she telling him all this now? Ethan's mind was still trying to process what he had just heard. He had always thought of the Zarethians as ruthless conquerors, driven by nothing but a desire for power. The idea that they had once been saved by humanity seemed impossible. He stared at Seraphis, her golden eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name: guilt, regret, or maybe both. But the more he thought about it, the more something felt wrong. How could humans have been involved in this war so long ago? He had never heard any of these stories in the history books or in any mission reports. Seraphis, sensing his confusion, took a step closer to the shackles that held Ethan in place. She raised her hand, and the chains holding him seemed to loosen without a word, as if the Queen herself commanded them to. Ethan blinked in surprise as the restraints fell away, and he stood up, rubbing his wrists. It was strange. He had expected to feel fear, anger, or even suspicion at the Zarethians' kindness. But instead, he felt a growing curiosity. "Why are you telling me this now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. "Why not before? Why didn't you warn me about all this when you first captured me?" Seraphis sighed, her gaze turning distant, as if she were remembering something painful. "Because we didn't know. For centuries, we believed humanity had abandoned us. We thought you had left the galaxy and vanished. We thought you were gone forever. But the truth is, after the war, you didn't disappear. You sealed yourselves away." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "Sealed yourselves away? What does that mean?" Seraphis seemed to hesitate for a moment before continuing. "After the Vothur were defeated, humanity did something we did not understand. You retreated. You hid your people. You locked yourselves away in secret places, leaving no trace. There were no messages, no signals, no signs. The galaxy believed humanity had vanished, that the great heroes of the past were nothing but a myth. Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. So you think humans have been hiding all this time? That we didn't just die out? Seraphis nodded solemnly. Yes, and that is why I am here, speaking to you now. We have discovered the truth. The Vothir are not truly gone. They have returned, and they are more dangerous than ever. They are a plague, a disease that spreads across the galaxy. And we are not strong enough to stop them alone. That is why I need your help, human. Your people must return. You are our only hope. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. The Vothir were a threat, an ancient, deadly force, and the Zarethians weren't strong enough to defeat them on their own. That meant humanity wasn't just part of some forgotten history. It was still part of the future. His people had been sealed away for reasons unknown, but now their return seemed necessary, even urgent. But what did it mean for him? For his crew? What did the Zarethians expect from him? And more importantly, could he trust them? Ethan finally spoke, his voice low but filled with resolve. What do you want from me? Seraphis' eyes softened. I want to undo the mistakes of our past. I want humanity to return, to help us fight the Vothir. And I want you to be the one to bring them back. The weight of her words hung in the air. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He was about to embark on a journey that would change everything. Ethan's mind was in a whirlwind. The words humanity's return echoed in his head, and he couldn't push them away. The Zarethians had been saved by humans long ago, and now they needed humanity's help once more. But the biggest shock was yet to come. The idea that humanity had sealed itself away, hidden from the galaxy, waiting for something. For this, he sat down on the cold floor, trying to think. It seemed impossible, but everything Seraphis had said made sense. The Vothir, a threat so terrifying that it had once driven the Zarethians to the brink of destruction. Perhaps they were the reason humanity had hidden away. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like a puzzle, pieces that didn't quite fit but somehow came together. Seraphis was still standing before him, watching him closely. There is more, she said, breaking his train of thought. There are records, old and nearly lost. They tell the story of how humanity vanished after the Vothir War. Ethan looked up, surprised. What do you mean nearly lost? Are there records that still exist? Where? Seraphis nodded. Yes, we found one. A hidden archive, deep within a system no one has visited for eons. It is on a planet that was thought to be nothing more than a dead world. It was the last place humanity traveled before retreating. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was huge. A hidden archive, possibly filled with secrets about humanity's past. The answers they needed could be there. But it would be dangerous. Zarethian ships were scattered across the galaxy, and no one knew what kind of risks lay on that long-forgotten planet. He looked at Seraphis. And you want me to go there? To that planet? Seraphis stepped closer, her expression serious. Yes, the records there might hold the key to understanding why humanity disappeared and how we can fight the Vothir. I believe there is something hidden there, something powerful, something your people, can activate. Ethan stood up, his resolve growing. This was more than just a mission now. It was personal. Humanity's history, their legacy, their future, everything was at stake. If what Seraphis said was true, and if he could find this archive, perhaps they could learn enough to stop the Vothir and uncover the secrets behind humanity's disappearance. He met Seraphis's gaze. All right, I'll go. I'll find the archive. But if I'm going to do this, I'll need help. Seraphis's eyes softened with understanding. You shall have it. My best warriors will accompany you, and I will ensure you are not alone in this. Ethan took a deep breath. This was the beginning of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. If humanity had truly vanished and left behind secrets, Then this journey would reveal the truth, not just about the past, but about the future of both humans and Zerethians. He turned towards the door, ready to step into the unknown. Then let's get started. The Vothir won't wait, and neither will the answers we need. As he left the room, his mind raced. They were heading into dangerous territory, but the weight of his mission was clear. Humanity's forgotten legacy might be the only thing that could save them all. The journey to the forgotten planet was long and treacherous. Ethan and Seraphis' team traveled aboard the Zerethian warship, a massive vessel equipped with advanced technology that Ethan could barely comprehend. He had learned to trust their tech, though it was still strange to him. The Zerethians were different, but they weren't his enemies anymore, not after everything Seraphis had told him. But as they approached the coordinates for the hidden planet, something in the air seemed to shift. Ethan could feel it deep in his bones, a nagging sensation that they were not alone. His instincts as a soldier told him to be ready. Seraphis stood beside him on the command deck, watching the distant planet slowly come into view. It was an unassuming world, covered in craggy mountains and dark oceans, with no sign of life. To the naked eye, it looked abandoned, like a forgotten ghost of the past. But Ethan knew better now. If humanity had hidden something here, it would be well guarded. "The Vothir are moving," Seraphis said softly, her voice tight with worry. "I can feel it. They're closer than we thought." Ethan turned sharply to face her. "What do you mean? How do you know?" "Their presence is like a dark cloud," Seraphis explained. "It grows stronger the closer we get to the planet. They know we're coming." The Vothir were a terrifying enemy, more than just a physical threat. They could infect entire populations, taking control of minds, turning once healthy bodies into mindless, puppet-like creatures. There was no escaping them once they had their claws in you. And now, it seemed, they had detected the presence of the Zerethians and humans coming together. Ethan clenched his fists. "We can't let them stop us. We have to find that archive." "We will," Seraphis said, determination in her voice. "But we must be cautious. The Vothir are cunning. They will use every trick they know to destroy us." The warship entered the atmosphere of the planet, the ship's engines roaring as it descended through the thick clouds. The planet's surface came into view, rugged, uninviting. Ethan could make out the remnants of ancient ruins in the distance, crumbling stone structures that had once been part of a great civilization. This was where the secrets of humanity's past were hidden, but it was also where danger waited. As they landed, the doors of the warship opened, and Ethan led the group out, his hand resting on the hilt of his blaster. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The ground beneath their feet was cracked, as if the planet had been dying for centuries. Suddenly, a loud screech filled the air, followed by the sound of something massive crashing through the trees nearby. Ethan's eyes widened in alarm as dark shapes emerged from the shadows. Vothir. Their bodies were a grotesque mixture of flesh and metal, with glowing red eyes that burned with malice. The first of them lunged at the group, its claws tearing through the air. Ethan barely had time to react as he fired his weapon, taking it down with a single shot. But there were more. Dozens, maybe hundreds, were emerging from the darkness. The Zerethian warriors beside him raised their weapons, and Seraphis stepped forward, her voice commanding. "Stay close. We will fight them back." Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't just about finding the archive anymore. The Vothir were here, and they weren't going to let them leave without a fight. The Vothir came at them in waves. Their grotesque, mutated bodies seemed to move in a terrifying, unnatural rhythm, like predators closing in for the kill. Ethan's pulse quickened as the first wave of creatures charged, their claws outstretched, their glowing red eyes locked on him and his team. He wasn't new to fighting, but this was different. The Vothir were like nothing he had ever faced before. There was no reasoning with them, no chance for negotiation. They were mindless in their attacks, driven by an urge to destroy everything in their path. And right now, they were blocking their only way to reach the archive. Ethan fired his blaster again, hitting one of the Vothur square in the chest. It staggered backward, but didn't go down. A second shot took it out, but there were more coming. Too many. Keep moving. Seraphis shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. We need to get to the ruins. Protect the path. Ethan nodded, signaling his team to advance. He wasn't about to let these monsters stop them. Not now. Not when they were so close to uncovering the secrets of humanity's past. The Zarethian warriors were already engaged in the fight, their advanced weapons cutting through the Vothur with deadly precision. Seraphis fought alongside them, her armor glinting as she swung a massive energy blade that tore through the air with incredible speed. She was a force of nature, fearless and powerful. But no matter how many they took down, more seemed to take their place. The Vothur were relentless. Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his blaster hot in his hand. He could hear the sounds of combat around him. The crackle of energy blasts, the growl of the Vothur, the clash of weapons. The team moved as one, each step a struggle against the overwhelming odds. Finally, they reached the ancient ruins. The crumbling stone structures towered before them, covered in vines and debris, but they were still standing strong. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he looked at the ruins. This place was old, older than anything he had seen in his life. It was a reminder of a time long gone, a time when humanity had walked among the stars. Seraphis was already leading the way, her keen eyes scanning the area. The archive is inside, she said. We must hurry. The Vothur will not stop until they have us. Ethan nodded, his gaze shifting to the dark shadows that surrounded them. The Vothur were closing in again, and the air was thick with tension. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. They had to find the archive, and they had to do it quickly. There was no telling what the Vothur would do if they got there first. We've got to hold them off, Ethan said, his voice steady. Go, I'll cover you. Without waiting for a response, he turned back to face the approaching Vothur. He fired again, hitting one of them in the shoulder. The creature shrieked in pain, but kept coming, relentless. He was starting to realize that the Vothur didn't feel pain the way other species did. The battle raged on as Ethan's team pushed into the ruins. The sound of blasters and screams filled the air, but they were focused on one goal: to find the archive and uncover what humanity had left behind. Ethan could feel the urgency in the air. Time was running out, and the Vothur were closing in. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. The group pushed forward through the ruins, moving as fast as they could, with the sound of Vothur shrieks echoing from all directions. The ancient stones of the buildings seemed to watch them as they ran, their cracked surfaces telling the story of a forgotten civilization. Ethan could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, but there was no time to stop and admire the ruins. Seraphis led the way, her instincts guiding her through the maze of broken structures. The archive is near, she called out, her voice steady but urgent. Just a little farther. Ethan kept his eyes on the shadows around them, watching for any sign of movement. The Vothur were relentless, and he had no doubt they were closing in. His hand gripped his blaster tighter, the cold metal comforting in his palm. His team was close behind, doing their best to fend off the creatures. But the Vothur were everywhere. They finally reached the heart of the ruins, a large open space with a massive stone door that seemed to have been untouched by time. Vines grew over it, and the markings on the surface were almost too worn to read. But Ethan didn't need to understand them. This was it, the archive. He could feel it in his bones. Seraphis stepped forward, brushing aside the thick vines. She placed her hand on the stone door, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the door slowly began to open, revealing the darkened interior. A chill ran down Ethan's spine as the door creaked open. Inside, he could sense something important, something powerful. The answers they needed were waiting. Stay alert, Seraphis warned. The Vothur will not give up. Ethan nodded, stepping into the darkness behind her. The air was thick and cool inside the archive, and the faint glow of blue symbols on the walls lit the path ahead. It was like walking into another time, a time when this place had been full of life and knowledge. Now it was silent, except for the occasional echo of their footsteps. They moved deeper into the archive, the glow of the symbols growing brighter as they went. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment. This place, this hidden sanctuary, was where the key to humanity's past and future lay. But he also knew the Vothir weren't far behind. They had to hurry. Seraphis stopped in front of a large stone pedestal in the center of the room. Atop the pedestal sat an ancient data cube, glowing faintly with a blue light. She reached for it carefully, as if it were something fragile, something precious. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "This cube holds the secrets of the humans who disappeared. It contains everything. Why you left, how you hid yourselves, and what's needed to defeat the Vothir." Ethan could hardly breathe. This was it, the answer they had been searching for. But just as Seraphis picked up the cube, a loud crash echoed through the ruins. The Vothir had found them. "Move," Ethan shouted, pulling Seraphis to her feet. "We've got what we came for. Now we need to get out." The archive began to tremble, and Ethan could feel the ground shaking beneath him. The Vothir were closing in faster than he expected. They had no time to waste. With the data cube in hand, they had one chance to escape, and it was slipping away quickly. Ethan's heart raced as the ground shook beneath them. The Vothir were closing in, and the walls of the archive seemed to be crumbling with each passing second. Seraphis held the data cube tightly in her hand, her eyes flashing with determination. They couldn't afford to waste a moment. "Move," Ethan shouted, grabbing Seraphis by the arm and pulling her toward the exit. The Zarethian warriors were already fighting off the Vothir at the entrance, but Ethan knew they couldn't hold them off forever. The creatures were too many, and the clock was ticking. As they sprinted through the dark corridors of the archive, Ethan could hear the sounds of the battle raging behind them. The crackle of energy blasts, the shrieks of the Vothir. It was all getting closer. Every step felt like it might be their last. Finally, they reached the exit, but the sight that greeted them was worse than they could have imagined. The Vothir had surrounded the entrance, their eyes glowing with fury. There were too many to fight head-on, and Ethan knew they had no choice but to find another way out. "We're trapped," Seraphis said, her voice strained. Ethan scanned the area, his mind working quickly. The only option was to go back deeper into the ruins, where they might find an escape route. But that would mean taking on more Vothir, and they were already exhausted from the fight. "We need to make a run for it," Ethan said. "There's an old transport tunnel deeper inside the ruins. If we can get there, we can escape." Seraphis nodded, her face grim. "It's a long shot, but it's the only chance we have." With the Vothir closing in, Ethan made the call. "Let's go." They turned and ran, the sound of their feet echoing through the stone hallways. The Vothir were close now, their claws scraping against the stone. Ethan could feel their presence like a cold shadow hanging over him. As they neared the transport tunnel, the ground beneath their feet suddenly cracked, and a loud roar filled the air. Ethan barely had time to react as a massive Vothir creature lunged at them, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his face. He fired his blaster without thinking, hitting the creature square in the chest. It staggered back, but didn't fall. Another one charged, and another, until Ethan felt surrounded. There was no way they could hold them off. "Go! Get to the tunnel!" Ethan yelled to Seraphis. Seraphis didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the tunnel entrance. But the Vothir were relentless. Ethan continued to fire, trying to buy them enough time to escape. Each shot seemed to slow the creatures, but they just kept coming. Finally, Seraphis reached the tunnel. She turned, looking back at Ethan with wide eyes. "Come on. We don't have much time." Ethan fired one last shot, taking down two of the Vothir, before he turned and ran. His lungs burned with each step, but he didn't stop. Not until he reached the tunnel and dove inside. The entrance to the tunnel slammed shut behind them with a loud clang. The sound of the Vother outside was muffled, but Ethan knew it wasn't over. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, they were safe. "Is everyone all right?" Ethan asked, looking around at the small group. Seraphis nodded, still holding the data cube. "We're alive. That's all that matters." Ethan exhaled, his heart still pounding. But the hardest part wasn't over. They had the cube, yes, but now they had to figure out how to use it, and how to stop the Vother before they destroyed everything. The transport tunnel was dark and narrow. The only sound was their footsteps echoing against the cold metal walls. Ethan kept his hand on his blaster, ready for anything, though the silence around them felt almost unnatural. The immediate danger of the Vother was behind them, but Ethan knew it wasn't over. They still had to figure out what to do with the data cube and how to defeat the creatures that were hunting them. Seraphis held the cube tightly in her hands. Her face was tired, but her eyes were focused. "We're not out of danger yet. The Vother will come after us, and if they find out what this cube contains..." She trailed off, looking down at the object in her hands. Ethan knew the weight of her words. The cube held the key to humanity's lost legacy, and it wasn't just a historical artifact. It could be the weapon that turned the tide against the Vother. If the wrong hands got it, the results would be catastrophic. "We'll make sure no one else gets their hands on it," Ethan said, his voice steady. He trusted Seraphis, but he also knew that the Zarethians had their own agendas. They couldn't afford to let their mission be hijacked. Seraphis looked up at him, her expression serious. "I trust you, Ethan, but we have to figure out how to unlock the secrets inside this cube. We don't have the technology to decode it." Ethan nodded. "Then we find someone who does. We're not alone in this fight." The tunnel twisted and turned for what felt like hours, until they finally reached a small, hidden base deep beneath the surface of the planet. The base was an old military facility, abandoned long ago. But it had been preserved, its technology still intact. As the group stepped inside, Ethan could see the signs of age, dust, broken equipment, but there were still signs of life. This place had once been a hub of activity. "This should be the place," Seraphis said, her voice soft as she looked around. Ethan felt it too. There was something in the air, a strange energy. Whatever this place had once been, it had connections to the hidden history of humanity. But first, they had to get the cube open. They found a control room at the center of the base, filled with old terminals and blinking lights. Seraphis moved to one of the terminals, pressing buttons and swiping her hands across the dusty screen. The old machine whirred to life. "Let's see if this still works," she muttered, fingers flying over the controls. After a few tense moments, a low hum filled the room. The terminal screen flickered and then displayed a set of symbols, codes, strange and complex. Seraphis frowned. "These codes are ancient, but I think I can crack them," she said, focusing intently on the screen. "Give me a moment." Ethan paced, his mind working fast. They were close. The cube, the knowledge within it, could be the turning point in the war. If they could figure out how to use it, the Vother might be stopped. Suddenly, the terminal beeped. Seraphis smiled. "Got it." The cube in her hand started to glow. The symbols on the screen matched those on the cube's surface, and the room seemed to hum with power. A soft, warm light filled the space. Ethan stepped forward, feeling the weight of what was happening. This was it. The answers were here. But as the cube revealed its secrets, Ethan knew that the true battle was just beginning. The glow from the cube intensified, casting a soft light across the room. Ethan stood frozen, watching as the ancient symbols slowly shifted and rearranged themselves on the screen. The secrets within the cube were unfolding, and with each passing second, a sense of urgency filled the air. Seraphis stared at the terminal, her eyes wide with focus. "It's working," she muttered. This is the key, the answer we've been searching for. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding. The information was now within their reach, knowledge that could change the course of the war and defeat the Vothir once and for all. He couldn't let anything stand in their way now. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the tunnel outside. The Vothir were close. Too close. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he turned to Seraphis. "We don't have much time." "I know," Seraphis replied, her voice tight. "The cube is unlocking the weapon, something that can stop the Vothir, but it needs time to fully activate. Can we hold them off long enough?" Ethan asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his blaster. Seraphis didn't hesitate. "We have to." The room began to rumble as the Vothir's screeches grew louder. The walls shook, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The door to the control room suddenly burst open, and a wave of Vothir stormed in, their glowing red eyes fixated on Ethan and Seraphis. "Get to the weapons bay," Ethan shouted, aiming his blaster at the first Vothir charging toward them. He fired, hitting the creature in the chest. It staggered, but more were coming. Too many. Seraphis grabbed the cube and nodded. "Go, I'll cover you." Ethan ran toward the weapons bay, blasting his way through the Vothir as they tried to surround him. Each shot felt like it took everything he had, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. Not when they were so close to victory. Inside the weapons bay, Ethan quickly activated the control panel. A series of powerful weapons flickered to life, the energy fields humming with potential. One of them, a massive cannon, was the perfect choice. It was humanity's last hope, the weapon that could obliterate the Vothir once and for all. He turned to Seraphis, who was still fighting off the Vothir at the entrance. "Seraphis, we need to aim it together." She nodded, moving swiftly toward him, the energy blade in her hand flashing as she cut down the remaining Vothir in the room. Together, they aimed the cannon at the center of the Vothir horde. The weapon hummed, building up energy. Ethan's fingers flew over the controls, focusing on the targeting system. The Vothir were closing in, but they had one shot. Seraphis's voice was calm despite the chaos. "On 3. Ready?" Ethan nodded. 1, 2, 3. With a deafening roar, the cannon fired, releasing a massive burst of energy that surged through the air. The blast hit the Vothir directly, sending shockwaves through the room. The creatures shrieked as they were disintegrated, their bodies nothing but dust in the wind. The explosion left a silence that felt like a breath held too long. The immediate danger was over, but they both knew this was only the beginning. Ethan turned to Seraphis, who was breathing heavily, the cube still glowing in her hand. "We've done it. The Vothir are finished." Seraphis's eyes were filled with resolve. "No, Ethan, this is just one battle. The war is far from over, but we have the power now. And with it, we can bring an end to their reign." Ethan looked out over the wreckage, his heart filled with hope for the first time in a long while. They had fought, survived, and won. Now they had a chance to rebuild and finally end the terror the Vothir had spread across the galaxy. And together, they would make sure humanity's legacy lived on.